When do you believe human suffering came into existence? That was the question that I asked. And before I really get into it, I want to make sure that we first define what human suffering is. An easy way to use that is that a moment in time where your current state does not align with where you want to be or where you expect to be in that current moment. That would be, I guess, the definition. But this is the spectrum, of course. It could be as minute as suffering that you believe you should be making X amount of dollars, or maybe suffering for the sake that you don't have basic human necessities such as water, shelter, or just safety in general. But when we define it this way, the only way that you can define or realize suffering is happening is if you become the observer of your reality. This means that you are no longer just a being that's experiencing this suffering. You are able to step out of this situation and look at it from the outside. So you are looking inside from being outside. So, like I said, you are now more than just a being, you're an observer. Now, you could take this literally, metaphorically, physically, psychologically, spiritually, or religious in any way you want. But the truth is, you think, therefore you are. But what happened before all of this? What happened before we became this individual or this creature, this thing that can observe what is happening to them and no longer just happening? That's it, just happening. So here's my thought process. Because what about species that are not like humans? Do they think the same way that we do? Do they experience suffering? If you look at, let's say, your pets, for instance, um, do you believe that they go through the process of suffering or euphoria, or are they just excitable neurons? Here's my idea. Suffering came into existence when the invention or idea of reflection came to be. So I'd say the invention of the mirror is probably when the pandemic of suffering began to spread. But before the mirror, when humans gained consciousness, is when I believe suffering really began. But on the flip side, this is also when euphoria began. So it's a high risk, high reward circumstance when humans develop this ability to reflect on their current state. You see, human experience is much different than any other species experience because they just experience purely for survival. That is their experience. That's it. Whereas human, whether this change happened from a mutation, an alien experimentation, godly intervention. Something changed humans to go from survival to that ability to think and say, what if? To wander, to think about the latter versus just living day to day instinctually just for the sake of surviving and procreating. Now, when you're watching an animal documentary, let's say, or even back in high school or grade school, you're reading a book about birds, let's say, you read about their characteristics, their nature, what they do on a day-to-day basis, and you know, it's very simple. And there was a point in time when humans were just the same thing. You could open up a book of species and you would see Homo sapiens, what have you, whatever it was. If we were to go back in time and they had that, we'd be able to look at all of the natures behind humans. I mean, you can still do the same thing today, but the difference is it was much more simple in those times. There weren't any social constructs, if I may. But now we have the ability to reflect more on just for survivability. We created a sense of being. We created more than one identity or masks, if I may. You could choose one day to be a type A personality or type B personality, and each of those individuals would have a different sense of positive or negative environments or emotions. But if we do not fulfill the role or identity that we have put on, whether that's the mask that we decide to put on, whether we're a customer service representative, a father, a mother, a firefighter, something along those lines, if we don't fulfill that role, we experience some level of suffering or euphoria. But here's the notion that I want to kind of close with today's little discussion between you and I. Here's an interesting thought. If you took the mask you wear every day off, the mask you identify with, you can be one of two things now. You can either be an animal, some low intellectual being, and just live on the sense of survivability, or you can be everything at the same time. Some might call this a god. Both of these options come with no suffering, which is interesting to note. You just are. You just be. You just follow the nature of what it is you are. But instead, every day we compare ourselves with ideals that have been crafted and evolved thousands of years ago. These ideals are a box that has been molded where someone, one particular individual, on top of the pyramid, has been benefiting throughout time. There's always that one individual. And that is where the suffering stems from. However, on the flip side, this can also be where we can experience euphoria, a myriad of positive feelings, but it all comes at a price. So, out of curiosity, would you want to have no suffering and no euphoria, but forced to survive? Or do you play the game, that rat race, stay in the matrix, and take your chance at happiness while risking despair?